Hi, my name is Andrew Evans, and in this video, I'm going to be talking about the 1973 paper by Peter Sedgwick called Illness, Mental and Otherwise. Now, Sedgwick's article can be seen as a response to the anti-psychiatry movement. I've previously made a video about Thomas Saz, who is considered part of that movement, even though he himself didn't like that label. And Sedgwick explicitly refers to Saz at different points, and we'll be talking about Saz a little bit in this video. So I do recommend watching the video on Saz before watching this video on Sedgwick. And one thing I want to note is that Sedgwick is coming at this from the perspective of a socialist activist. So he's coming from this very left political perspective, and that comes through in his writing. He agrees with the anti-psychiatry advocates that mental illness is socially constructed, but he disagrees with them on several other matters. For Sedgwick, physical illness is also socially constructed, and he thinks that just because illness is constructed does not mean it ought not be treated. So, a little bit of background briefly. The anti psychiatry movement is this movement from the 1960s that challenged the power and legitimacy of the mental health field of the time. One major claim is that mental illnesses are social constructs, or that they don't really exist. They're not deviations from biological norms. And so Sedgwick is agreeing that he thinks that mental illnesses are social constructs, but he thinks illness in general is a social construct, and that shouldn't really be tied to whether or not we treat it or not. Okay, so here is a quote from Sedgwick. He says, quote, "It appears to me that none of the anti-psychiatry advocates have begun by asking the question, what is illness? Only in light of an answer to this question could we determine our answer to the question, is mental illness really illness in the medical sense?" Now, I'm not sure if this quote really is fair, because I do think Saz talks explicitly about what illness is. But I did want to include it because I think this is the important move for Sedgwick's paper. He is saying it's really most important for us to understand what illness is, and and if we can understand mental illness as part of illness, that'll help us answer this question on whether mental illnesses are a myth or not, the way Saz has argued that they are. Okay, so Sedgwick points out that Saz makes a big distinction between mental illness and physical illness. This is a quote. He says, "Sazians allocate the natural sciences to an area dealing with medically reputable complaints, those referring to diseased organs of the body, and then set up another non-medical autonomous zone for what is at present called psychiatry. For Saz, psychiatric practitioners must see themselves as consultants responsible to their clients rather than as social agents programming the mentally ill." So, what does Sedgwick mean by this? What he's saying is that for Saz, he is really making a sharp distinction between real medicine that treats physical illnesses on the one hand, we can see represented by this doctor on the left, and psychiatry, which purports to be treating illness, but is actually just treating socially constructed problems in living. And that's treated by therapists or psychoanalysts on the right. Okay. So he's putting out that Saz is saying, like, all the physical and biological problems go on the left and they're treated by medicine, and that is a sort of institution of society. And on the right, we have this autonomous zone, this independent um, area where therapists can sort of treat problems in living that's totally independent of medicine, and and that sort of operates totally independently of medicine. So he doesn't want to conflate these two, Saz. He doesn't want therapists to be medicalizing the people they're working with. Now, of course, Saz continued to be a therapist after he critiqued um, mental illness as being a myth. So this is part of that distinction. He thinks that therapists can continue to operate, but they should be independent of the medical field. So Saz is saying that mental illnesses are social constructs, and so should not be treated medically. And Saz is also saying that physical illnesses are deviations from biological norms, and so they should be treated medically. But Sedgwick thinks that anytime we attribute the label illness to something, it is because we are choosing to do so. For him, all illnesses, whether physical or mental, are socially constructed. So, what does he mean by this? Why does he think that everything is, in terms of illness, socially constructed? This is a quote from him. He says, "All departments of nature below the level of mankind are exempt from disease and from treatment until man intervenes with his own human classifications of disease and treatment." Now, of course, it's unfortunate that Sedgwick is using terms like mankind and man to refer to all humans. But what is he saying in this quote? He's saying that all departments of nature, so we can maybe think of that as all biological organisms, are exempt from being considered diseased or from treatment if they have nothing to do with humans. Only when humans intervene and put their own human classifications on the biological world is disease and treatment even possible. So Sedgwick is saying that illness is a label that humans put onto things. There is no illness or treatment of illness in the natural world, in the biological world, until humans come along. So here's another quote from him. He says, quote, "All illness, whether conceived in localizing bodily terms or within a larger view of human functioning, expresses both a social value judgment, contrasting a person's condition with certain understood and accepted norms, and an attempt at explanation with a view to controlling the disvalued condition." So he's saying all illness has to do with social norms. And we also, when we say something's an illness, we're trying to explain it, right? We're trying to control it. We're trying to treat it. So an example he uses is when we grow corn. So corn is a plant. It is an organism, right? It's a biological thing. And he says when farmers grow corn and the corn has a parasite in it, we consider the corn to be diseased, right? And we might treat the corn in some way to remove the parasite. But the only reason we conceive of it that way is because corn is important to humans. We are harvesting the corn because we want to eat it. If instead what we were trying to harvest were the parasites, then we might consider corn to simply be the necessary food for the parasites. So it's not that the corn would be diseased then, it would just be serving its purpose as food for the parasites that we're actually trying to harvest. So the point he's trying to make here is that in nature, there's no such thing as disease or illness. It's only how we conceive of it as humans. Only when we conceive of it that way as humans that then we think of it as illness, having illnesses or disease. But before moving on, I want to stop for a second. What do you think of this claim? Are illnesses really social constructs? Are all illnesses really social constructs? And I think we have to be clear here about what Sedgwick is saying and what he isn't. He's not saying that, so let's take animals, for example, animals in the wild that humans don't interact with. He's not saying that those humans don't feel pain or that those those animals, he's not saying that those animals don't feel pain. He's not saying that those animals don't have, processes in their bodies that are abnormal or that are even dysfunctional according to some metric, right? Clearly, these things happen, right? There are cases of problems that exist for the animal, right? Including pain, discomfort, disability, right? That exists in in animals and in plants, regardless of human classification. He's saying illness is this special category that attributes something more to those things. So when we call an animal ill or diseased, we're putting the further human classification on it. We're saying that this is something that we're noting is a problem and that ought to be treated. But we can question that, right? We might be more hard line about illnesses and disease and say, no, 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 of course, plants and animals have diseases and illnesses independent of human interaction, independent of human classification, right? So this is a point we could push back at Sedgwick if we wanted to. Okay, so Sedgwick suspects that there is actually conservative ideology underlying the anti-psychiatry critiques of mental health care, like Saz's. By saying that mental illnesses are not real illnesses, anti-psychiatry gives governments permission to not fund treatment of those conditions. That's his claim. So he thinks that you know people like Saz are saying that mental illnesses aren't real illnesses, and that actually gives uh, governments permission to say, okay, well, I guess we don't have to treat them then. I guess we don't have to provide mental health services if mental illnesses are not real illnesses. So he thinks there's this underlying sort of conservatism there. And I think he's right in the case of Saz at the very least. Saz not only was a psychiatrist and a critic of psychiatry, but he was also a noted libertarian and really thought that the government should stay out of the business of people and physicians. He really wanted to create this, autonomous zone that psychiatrists could operate independently of the larger healthcare field or of government, right? So, at least in the case of SARS, there does seem to be this underlying conservative line of thinking. And Sedgwick is explicitly coming from a leftist position. He's coming from a socialist position where he thinks that the government should be funding more. So he says, quote, "My case points not to the technologizing of illness, to the medicalization of moral values, but on the contrary, to the politicization of medical goals. I am arguing that without the concept of illness, including that of mental illness, since to exclude it would constitute the crudest dualism, we shall be unable to make demands on the health service facilities of the society we live in." So this is really interesting. Sedgwick is saying that all illness is socially constructed, but he doesn't think we should therefore stop treating illnesses. And he doesn't think that we should stop treating mental illnesses. He thinks that actually, even though it's socially constructed, it's causing people a lot of pain. It's causing people a lot of problems and disability. So we ought to be treating these things. And to try to claim that mental illnesses aren't real illnesses and make them distinct from physical illnesses, that's just giving the government an excuse to not fund treatment. And the government should be funding treatment. We should expect that of our society. So this is sort of Sedgwick's socialist critique of the anti-psychiatry movement. He thinks that all illnesses are socially constructed, but that people still deserve treatment regardless. So again, we can kind of get back to this division that Saz sets up between we have real illness on the one side treated by the medical professionals, and we have psychosocial problems in living on the other side treated by therapists, independent of medicine, independent of the government. Sedgwick is so critical of this because ultimately, who's going to be able to afford that therapy on the right side? People that are well off enough to pay for it, because the government isn't funding it and there isn't health insurance for it, right? At least I think that's what Saz would want in an ideal situation, because he doesn't think that therapy and mental problems have to do with healthcare. And this is Sedgwick's critique. Creating this divide ends up excluding people from treatment that need it, especially poorer people that can't afford to pay out of pocket for therapy services. So Sedgwick is really saying two things in this paper. He's saying that all illnesses are socially constructed, but also that even if we agree that mental illness, like all illnesses, are socially constructed, that doesn't mean we shouldn't be treating it and we shouldn't be funding treatment. All right, that is all I have for this video. Thank you for watching.